Chapter 18. Your brothers are idiots, I told Xander, pacing back and forth in front of the building. Oren, who just stood a few feet away, looked somewhat amused. It's fine, Xander assured me. This is just what brothers do. I highly doubt that. From the inside of the building, there was silence. By tradition, the first blow is Gray's, Xander offered helpfully. He usually goes for a leg sweep, classic, but he'll circle Jameson first. They'll circle each other, really, and Gray will go into warnings and order mode, which will cause Jamie to mock him, so on and so forth until the first blow is struck. There was a thud from inside. And after that, I asked, my eyes narrowing. Xander grinned. We have an average of 3 black belts apiece, but it usually devolves into wrestling. One of them will pin the other, argue, bicker, and voila! Given that Grayson had made it very clear he thought pulling the strings of Toby's disappearance was a bad idea, I had a guess or two about what that argument might sound like. I'm going back in, I muttered, but before I could, the door to the building opened. Jameson stood there, looking only slightly worse for the wear. He didn't seem injured. A little sweaty, maybe, but not bleeding or bruised. I take there's no beatdown, I said. Jameson grinned. What would make you think that? He glanced over at Oren. If you wait out here, you have my word that she'll be perfectly safe inside. It's secure. I know, Oren stared Jameson down. I designed the security on this building myself. Can you give us a minute, Oren? I asked. My head of security shot a hard look in Jameson's direction, then Xander's, and then nodded. Xander and I followed Jameson back inside. Don't worry, Jameson murmured as Grayson came into view. I took it easy on him. Like Jameson, Grayson appeared unharmed. As I watched him slip his suit jacket back on. You two are idiots, I muttered. Be that as it may, Grayson replied, if you want my help. He wasn't wrong. Yes, we did. I told you this was a bad idea, Avery. Grayson's focus was on me and me alone. It was intense. I wasn't used to people being protective of me. But right now, protection wasn't what I wanted or needed from him. While you and Jason were playing WWF like 8-year-olds, I said, did he happen to tell you that Toby was adopted? I swallowed, looking down because this next part was harder to say. Did he tell you about my birth certificate? Your what? Xander said immediately. Grayson stared at me. He was just as capable as any Hawthorne of reading between the lines. Toby was adopted. I'd mentioned my birth certificate. Everyone in this room knew why this search mattered to me. Here's a picture I took. I held my phone out to Grayson. Those are the charities listed in the will your grandfather wrote shortly after Toby's disappearance. Grayson managed to take the phone from me without fingers so much as brushing. Besides me, I could feel Jameson's stares just as palpable as his brother's. There are a few surprises on this list. Grayson looked up from the phone just in time to catch me watching him read. Most of these organizations have received regular support, or at the very least, a sizable one-time donation from the Hawthorne Foundation. I forced myself to pay attention to what Grayson was saying, not the way his silvery eyes set on mine as he talked. You said a few surprises, I pointed out, not none. Off the top of my head, I see 4 organizations that I don't recognize. That doesn't mean we haven't given to them before. But it's a start, Jameson's voice buzzed with familiar energy. Familiar to me. Almost certainly familiar to all of his brothers. The Allport Institute, Grayson rattled off, Camden House, Collins Way, and the Rockaway Watch Society. Those are the only 4 organizations on this list that I haven't seen in the Foundation's records. Immediately, my brain started cataloging what Grayson had said, playing with the words and the letters, looking for a pattern. Institute, house, way, watch, I tried out loud. Watch, house, institute, way. Jameson scrambled the order. 4 words, Xander offered, and all 4 names. Allport, Camden, Collin, Rockaway. Grayson stepped between the 2 of us and past Jameson and kept on walking. But I'll leave you 3 to it, he said. Near the doorway, he paused. But Jamie, you're wrong. And then Grayson said something in a language I deeply suspected was Latin. Jameson's eyes flashed, and he responded in the same language. I glanced at Xander. The youngest Hawthorne's eyebrow really, since he burned the other one off, skyrocketed. He clearly understood what had just been said, but volunteered no translation. Instead, he tugged me towards the doorway and the SUV parked outside. Come on. Chapter 19. On the drive back to Hawthorne House, Jameson, Xander, and I buried ourselves in our phones. I assumed that their missions were the same as mine, to research the 4 charities that Grayson had identified. My intuition was that they might not actually be charities, that Tobias Hawthorne might have made them up as part of a puzzle, but in a series of internet searches quickly dispelled that theory. The Allport Institute, Camden House, Collins Way, and the Rockaway Watch Society were all registered nonprofits. Sorting out the details of each one took longer. The Allport Institute was a research facility based in Switzerland, dedicated to studying the neuroscience of memory and dementia. I scrolled through the staff page, reading each of the scientists' bios. Then I clicked on some news coverage about the Institute's latest clinical trials: short-term memory loss, dementia, Alzheimer's, amnesia. I sat with that for a moment. Is this a clue? To what? I glanced out the window and caught sight of Jameson's reflection in the glass. His hair could never quite decide which way to lie, and even caught up in thought, his face was always in motion. When I finally managed to turn my attention back to my phone, the next search term I typed in wasn't one of the charities. It was my best approximation of the words that Grayson had said to Jameson back at the foundation. Est unus ex nobis, nos defendit ius. As I'd suspected, it was Latin. An online translator told me that it meant, it is one of us. We protect it. Jameson's response, Schio, means, I know. It took me one more search to realize that the same translation would hold if it was replaced with she. She is one of us. We protect her. Maybe I should have bristled at that. 3 weeks ago, I probably would have, but 3 weeks ago, I never would have dreamed that they could come to see me as one of them. That I could be one of them, not just an outsider looking in. Trying not to let that thought consume me, I forced myself to move on to the next charity on my list. Camden House was an inpatient rehabilitation center for substance abuse and addiction focused on the whole person. The website was full of testimonials. The staff was full of doctors, therapists, and other professionals. The grounds were beautiful. But the website didn't provide any answers. An Institute for Memory Research in Switzerland, an addiction treatment facility in Maine. I thought about the pills and the powder that we found in Toby's room. What if Tobias Hawthorne had used his will and these 4 charities to tell a story? Maybe Toby was an addict. Maybe he was a patient at Camden House. As for the Allport Institute, I didn't get a chance to finish that thought before we pulled through the gates of the estate. As we wound our way up the long drive, I snuck a look at the boys. Xander was still fixated on his phone, but Jameson was staring straight ahead. The moment we stepped out of the car, he took off. So much for working on this together. Oh, look, Xander said, nudging me in the side. There's Nan. Hello, Nan. The boy's great-grandmother glared at Xander from the porch. And just what have you been up to? She asked him sharply. Nonsense and mischief, he replied solemnly. Always. She scowled, and he bounded up onto the porch and kissed the top of her head. She swatted at him. Think you can sugar me up, do you? Perish the thought, Xander replied. I don't have to sugar you up. I'm your favorite. Are not, Nan grunted. She poked him with her cane. Go on with you. I want to talk to the girl. Nan didn't ask if I wanted to talk. She just waited for me to approach, then took my arm for balance. Walk with me, she ordered. In the garden. She said nothing for at least 5 minutes as we made our way at a snail's pace through a topiary garden. Dense bushes had been shaped into sculptures. Most were abstract, but I saw a topiary elephant and couldn't keep an incredulous look from settling over my face. Ridiculous, Nan scoffed. All of it. After a long moment, she turned to me. Well, what? I said. What have you done to find my boy? Nan's harsh expression trembling slightly and her grip on my arm tightened. I'm trying, I said quietly, but I don't think Toby wants to be found. If Toby Hawthorne wanted to be found, he could have returned to Hawthorne House at any time in the last 20 years. Unless he doesn't remember. That thought hit me out of nowhere. The Alport Institute focused on memory research, Alzheimer's, dementia, and memory loss. What if that was the story Tobias Hawthorne was telling in the will? What if his son had lost his memory? What if Harry didn't know he was Toby Hawthorne? The thought of that might not have lied to me nearly took me to my knees. I forced myself to slow down. I was leaping into conclusions. I didn't even know for certain that the 4 charities had been chosen to tell a story. Have you ever heard of Camden House? I asked Nan. It's a treatment center for... I know what it is, Nan cut me off, her voice gruff. There was no easy way to ask the next question. Did your daughter and son-in-law send Toby there? He wasn't an addict, Nan spat. I know addicts. That boy was just confused. I wasn't about to bicker with her about words, but they sent him to Camden House for his confusion? He was angry when he left, and angry when he got back. Nan shook her head. That summer, her lip quivered. She didn't finish what she was saying. Was that the summer of the fire? I asked softly. Before Nan could reply, a shadow fell across the two of us. Mr. Laughlin stepped onto the garden path. He was holding a pair of shears. Everything okay here? He scowled. I thought about Miss Laughlin calling me cruel. Everything's fine, I said, my voice tight. Mr. Laughlin took toward Nan. We talked about this, Pearl, he said gently. It isn't healthy. Clearly, he knew what I told Nan about Toby, and clearly, he didn't believe me any more than his wife did. After a long silence, Mr. Laughlin turned back to me. I made some repairs in the house, a muscle in his jaw tightened, to one of the older wings. When things fall into disrepair around here, he gave me a look. People get hurt. I understood then that one of the older wings was code for Toby's. I wasn't sure what the groundskeeper meant by repairs until I made my way back into Hawthorne House and went to check. Toby's wing had been bricked up again.